on, everybody? This is the Pro Wrestling Wire podcast. I am Rick Del Santo. I have Mr. Daryl Peterson here, formerly Maxx Payne, Man Mountain Rock, and pro wrestling legend in my eyes. I think so. I mean, I've had fun watching you over the years, and I want to thank you for joining me here today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to it, Rick.
Thank you. And now I understand that you were a football player and both an amateur wrestler in your youth. So you were definitely into sports, and I want to know that apparently you had a clash of personalities with your football coach, and that's what led you to wrestling?
That's so funny that you say that because, you know, now this long later, I have to actually go, wait a minute, did I play football? Oh, yeah, I did. Because I was, when I was a kid, I was a football fanatic. In fact, I remember in sixth grade, when you'd get the book lists of things you were going to buy, I bought both Bart Starr and Roger Staubach's book back then. And, I had my own, dream NFL guys and people I really, really loved in the NFL. Always been a huge Raiders fan. I just love the silver and black. So, from the time I was little, I just always presumed that football would be, my sport of choice. And like you said, It was so funny because, right when I was at the critical time in high school when I would have, really excelled in football, our high school wrestling coach, who's the one who talked me into wrestling. Actually, his name was Paul Gillespie. He was a great, great coach. I loved him so much. And, I'd been through the Little League system. And it was just so that in my hometown, we had a 4-year high school because we only had a 2-year junior high school. 7th and 8th grade was still at the junior high school, and then 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th was at the high school. And so I met Paul after my 8th grade year and started to talk to him, and he really liked me, and he looked at me and said, well, you're going to wrestle, right? And I said, no, I hate wrestling. He goes, well, you're not going to play football if you're not going to wrestle. And I went, whoa, wait a minute. Okay, I'll wrestle. And so I ended up wrestling and ended up loving wrestling because I had some really early on success in wrestling. And I was just, I loved it so much. And then he left. He, as coaches do, you're a kid, you don't think a coach is going to leave.
Right.
And he left and went to an adjoining town and became their coach and left our high school. And our high school hired this, to this day, I don't know how they did it, but they managed to find, a guy who was from the South. He was literally less than 5 feet tall. His name was Bill Kelly. And he spoke with a hard Southern accent. And, the part I guess I never understood is as a freshman in high school, I was 6'4", 275. And he was going to run the baby fat off of me instead of just, loving me and inspiring me to be a great football player and just, instead insisted on me staying after practices and torturing me while everybody else had gone in because, I was overweight, a little too overweight for him. And, I finally had enough. And I said, I was that kid. I was such a rebel that I said, yeah, I'm not going to do that. But I didn't just play football, man. I started playing basketball when I was in junior high. I did little kids wrestling programs when I was like in 2nd or 3rd grade. The coach that came to be the wrestling coach at my high school He immediately, when he came there, started a little kids wrestling program. So very early on, I started the little kids wrestling program, which is how I knew I hated wrestling at the time. Because I'd done the little kids program. I said, enough of that shit. I ain't doing that. And so, I ended up, but I threw the shot put. I played basketball. I swam on the swimming team. So I was a year round, I played baseball, all the way from the time I was 4 years old. In fact, I still have a trophy when I was a bat boy when I was on the Cardinals in Pleasant Grove, Utah at 4 years old. So they gave me a trophy I still have to this day. And so I just was, I grew up loving athletics. And then my dad did something once that just concreted my love for athletics. Is he took me to a Harlem Globetrotters game when I was a kid. And wow, that just concreted how much I loved, athletics. And we'd spend hours talking about it. We had this little black and white TV, and we would watch athletic events. I mean, I know that sounds crazy. Literally, it was like probably a 10-inch black and white television that my parents had until I was probably 13 or 14 years old.
Right.
And we watched, we always watched, if he was home on Monday nights, we watched Monday night football games. We watched football, basketball. He loved athletics. And so that was one of the things I loved to do with my father was watch athletics. And so from the very beginning of my life, I was addicted to athletics, and I was pretty good at it.
Awesome. That's awesome.
So,
yeah. You took some time off. Is it because you had a motorcycle accident, correct? And then you made a comeback?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. It was funny. I was, another one of my young idols, as a young man was Evel Knievel.
Right.
And I loved motorcycles so much. And then my nephew, it's funny, I have a brother that's 24 years older than me, and he has two children that are both older than me. So I have a nephew that's 5 years older than me and a niece that's 5 years older than me. And they used to call me Uncle Daryl, which was always funny. And my brother always bought them motorcycles,
Right.
And so I was really lucky because my mother and father were older. I was a severe oops. And so my parents would sort of sanction me off in the summertime to go live with my brother because he had three children that were my age.
Right.
So I would go to Northern California, and when I say Northern California, I mean Northern California. This was Eureka and Fortuna. And then because he was a construction worker, he was what they call an oiler on big, any kind of rigs, rock crushers, yarders, anything to do with the logging industry. He oiled all the machines, and he was a mechanic. And so he traveled all over the Western United States. And so every summer he would take gigs in places that were awesome, like Shasta. And I spent a whole summer at Shasta in Mount Shasta in California. And it's one of it's one of those memories as a kid. I was 8 years old. And it was just spectacular. I learned how to ride a motorcycle, and we picked wild berries, and we fished. I mean, I got so many stories that came from that. So I was really, really lucky. I spent a lot of time with my older brother because my parents were older and my brother was closer to my age. And so I spent tons and tons of time outside the state of Utah in the summertime, to the chagrin of my mother sometimes, because I think it made her kind of jealous that I would go and not want to come home at the end of the summer. She really couldn't blame me much because I didn't have anybody in the house when I got home. So yeah, that's I'm sorry, I forgot what the original question was, but I think I answered it.
Just that you left after you had an accident, or
Oh yeah,
your
no,
work in
motorcycle
construction.
accident.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the
Yep.
motorcycle, that's where I was going to with the motorcycle
Yep.
thing. So the motorcycle thing, I started off with a mini bike, and
Hmm.
then I had a tote goat.
All right.
I don't know if you know what a tote goat is.
Never heard of it.
Tote
Not that,
goat is
no.
kind of exclusive to the Western United States. It's basically a big steel frame with a 7-horse Briggs and Stratton motor on it.
Okay.
And it's not really a motorcycle, but they used them a lot for deer hunting, because you could, they didn't go very fast, but they were kind of like a trials bike. They would go straight up the side of a mountain. So you
Right.
could put a deer over a tote goat and, haul it out of the woods. So then eventually they bought me a motorcycle, and I had a couple different motorcycles. I had a Honda Elsinore, and then I ended up with the trials bike. And when the trials bike is the motorcycle, which is I don't know if you know what a trials bike is, but a trials bike, if you could strap a trials bike to a telephone pole, it would idle up it. That's how powerful they are. They're
Wow.
they're designed. The competition of a trials bike is such that you go through a course and you're judged by how many times you put your feet down, and they put you through obstacles that are, you watch those kids on the bicycles that do stunts where they, hop on one wheel down into a culvert and spin around and then jump up out.
Yeah.
That's exactly what a trials bike is. I could turn that thing around on a dime, and then you could literally completely submerge this thing under the water above the gas tank, because the breather for the carburetor in the gas tank came out of the top of the gas tank, which had a hose on it. So you could probably put the whole motorcycle underwater 3 feet and still have this hose sticking out, and it would run.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. I got really good on that, but it's funny. This one particular day, I had a girlfriend at the time. Her name was Leanne Bates. It was I always tell the story. She reminded me of the song "Sister Golden Hair" by the band America. And
Right. Right. Yep.
she was my high school wannabe girlfriend. We ended up never being together, but I started kindergarten with Leanna, and I heard she was at these friends' house at the top of our street, and so I was up there showing off, and I was doing wheelies off of this hill, and they were like, I thought I was like. I really did think I was Evel Knievel. They were picturesque. I could pull the handlebars up and touch my chest and put it down. And I decided I was going to go really fast on the last time I did it. And the motorcycle came over backwards on me.
Oh, geez.
And so to make sure I knew enough that I didn't want the motorcycle to land on me. So I pushed it away. And when I hit, I basically broke my knee in half, hyperextending it. But here's the here's the cool part, if there is a cool part. The guy that lived right next door to those people was our town doctor. And so here I am, crashed, and his kids were outside playing. They heard me crash, and he came running out and give me a shot of morphine.
Wow.
Right there on the spot. And I'll never forget, I finally calmed down. The pain subsided when he gave me the morphine shot. And of course, the mom it was on a Sunday. So, of course, the mother had to say, she looked at both of her kids while I was laying there, hurting really bad, and said, "Now, this is what happens when you ride your motorcycle on Sunday." And this trials bike was so amazing. It's laying there idling finally I looked up and I said, I think I said to my friend Scott, his dad's name was Doyle Barrett. He was my doctor my whole life. I looked at Scott and I said, dude, would you do me a favor? And he goes, I'll do anything. What do you want, Pete? And I said, will you turn my fucking motorcycle off, man? Oh yeah, okay. So I went through a real tough time. I didn't think it was broken. I went through some real trauma discovering how bad it was. I didn't realize how bad it was. I didn't realize how unstable it was until I put some pressure on it and it gave away. And I went back actually. And I was only 14 years old. And the doctor that took care of me at the time was brutal. He was the head orthopedic surgeon for BYU, and I was 14 years old, and he treated me like I was a 21-year-old man, and I wasn't a 21-year-old man. And I still have the scar on my knee that is hideous to this day and shows the evidence of. It wasn't so much the surgery itself as he put a pin in my knee, and to get the pin out, he didn't numb me or put me to sleep. And my father threw up watching this procedure, and it's to this day, like even telling the story right now, I remember how horrific it was. It was probably better that happened to me because I wouldn't have survived football with my knee. I would have probably had, maybe if I was lucky, 1 or 2 good seasons with football. And because I'd already blown my anterior cruciate and medial lateral collateral, I would have been done. But because it was an anterior cruciate and, I don't have anterior cruciates in either one of my knees now. You can still function without an anterior cruciate. You just can't cut on a football field if you don't have an anterior cruciate. But I learned how to survive without it, and it got me through all of my athletic career the way it was. So despite the fact he was a butcher, he also rebuilt my knee in a good way and allowed me to have an athletic career despite what I'd been through.
Right. Wow. That is a crazy story, honestly. Seriously. That is just, I don't think I'd be able to survive that. I can't deal with pain like that.
Oh, it was rough, brother. I was actually out of school. It's funny because I only went to high school for a total of 2 years. I went to my freshman year, I went to half of my sophomore year, and half of my junior year, and then I dropped out and got married after takedown, which I'm sure you're going to end up at takedown. But I wasn't in high school very long.
That's the next question that I have. I want to ask you about Takedown. So you played a high school wrestler in that movie, and how'd you get that role, and what was that experience like?
Oh my God, it changed my life. I was already, to quote my ex-father-in-law, I was already that dramical kid. One of my favorite things to do was quote Monty Python, and I actually would quote wrestlers and stuff at the time, and so I was just, I loved to make people laugh. I was that kid growing up that, when I tried to be the life of the party. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Long before I was in Takedown, my mother, I was born and raised in a mental hospital. And when I say that, everybody goes, I could understand why you'd say that, Max. But my mother was the head attendant of the geriatric unit of the Utah State Mental Hospital. She basically ran the geriatric unit of the Utah State Hospital from the time I was born. My mother was a working mother because all my brothers were about to leave the house. And when I came along, she had planned on going back to work because she wasn't the kind of woman to sit home. My mother was a very strong, powerful woman. She'd gone back to work. And so she taught me empathy and how to love these people. And so I loved entertaining them as well. And
Right.
she taught me how to do that because she did it. She played the piano by ear, and then she'd created this band where she'd give them all instruments, and she'd sit down and play songs. And I helped her out, when during the summers of all of my schooling years, I I didn't have anybody to look after me, to babysit me. So on many, 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 many occasions, I would go to the Utah State Mental Hospital, and I basically worked for my mother, and and would entertain. And old folks like that, they just love kids, And I'll tell you a quick story about that. That's funny too. Is the first black person I ever met, because I grew up in Utah behind the Zion Curtain, and there were no black people going to school in Pleasant Grove, Utah when I was growing up. In fact, there were very few black folks in Utah County, and you won't find this hard to believe, but most of them that were there were in the state hospital. They were incarcerated in some fashion, because that's just how prejudiced, unfortunately, the area was. I'm not making excuses by any means, but that's the way it was at the time. The church had gone out of its way to not welcome blacks. But my mother we had this lady that worked that lived in the unit, and her name was Grace, and she was an old black woman. And I used to love and sit on her lap, and she'd sing me old Southern songs. And one day I was sitting there, and I was looking at her, and she looked at me, she goes, "What is it, son?" And I said, "Do those hurt?" And she said, what you talking about?" I said, "Those cracks in your skin, are those painful?" And she said, "No, those are just wrinkles from being old." She said, "Your mom, and you'll get them one day. Would you like to feel those?" And I said, "Could I?" You're like, "Yes, son, you just go." So I would sit there and touch her forehead, and then she'd laugh, she'd giggle. She had no teeth, and she would giggle. And so, I grew up in that kind of mentality. So from the very early age, I loved to entertain people. And after I blew my knee, I was devoted, because the football coach told me that I would never succeed in athletics as long as I lived, because I quit football, because I was a quitter. And my junior year, and then especially after I crashed on the motorcycle, I actually tried to take a class from this guy to try and rekindle my relationship with him. He wouldn't let me in his class. And when I was standing at the desk to sign up with, he goes, "I'm not letting you in my class." And he said, "You're never going to succeed in anything in athletics in your life, because now you got a blown knee on top of all that." And right then I thought, "You son of a bitch, watch what I can do." And so my junior year, I worked my ass off to get ready for wrestling. And halfway through my junior year, this would have been the fall of 1977. I was undefeated, and I'd pinned everybody I'd wrestled.
Wow.
And like in the first minute, I was just hammering people. And I heard that there was this movie going around, and I ignored the casting calls, because I didn't want anything to distract from me succeeding at my goal I was really focused and determined, because I actually wanted to put myself through school. I didn't know what I was going to do. Actually, at the time, believe it or not, I thought I was going to be a podiatrist. So I had ignored all the casting calls. And this one day I'd gone to get some ketchup, And I think I was driving down the road smoking a joint, and I see my dad's Lincoln coming towards me at breakneck speed. And I'm like, uh-oh, what's going on here? Because, Lincolns, when they go down a road that's, they look like they're floating, they look like they're in the ocean. I'm going, he's going really fast. And he pulls up beside me. I'll say it felt like he slid sideways up next to me. He goes, "There's a casting agent at the house. Get your ass up there. They want you to be in a movie." And I'm like, what? And so I said, okay. So I went to the house, and there was a lady there named Shirley Goodman. And she said, look, she said they're just casting for an extra part. I've already talked to your coach. You can go try out for it tomorrow. And all you got to do is go over to the old high school in the next town over from us. And I grew up in a town where whatever my town did, like when the school district built a high school in my town, this was during that era, they would build a same exact school in the next town,
Right.
and probably every town in Utah County had the same exact high school floor plan.
Right.
This was probably 1920s, 1930s, building. And so these guys had rented this old school in the town adjacent to me. And I walked in, and I mean, it was like a beehive. And I'm going like, oh, I was actually about ready to walk out, and this casting director comes up to me. I found out later he was a casting director. He comes up to me, he goes, "You're here for Bobich." And I'm like, huh? He goes, "You're here to read for Bobich." Throws me a script and said, "Learn the lines on page 7 and 8, and then they'll be out to get you in 5 minutes. Just be ready to go." I'm like, learn the lines? What? Learn the lines? And so eventually they came and got me, and the director, I did a couple of scenes, and the director did something that really set me at ease. He said, "Act to me like I'm your high school principal." And that was really easy for me because my high school principal was a guy named John P. Gurley, and I loved him with all my heart. He was a great man, and in the end, he gave me my high school diploma. After I didn't graduate. I got my GED, but I went back years later, and he got in his drawer and filled out a diploma for me and signed it and handed it to me on the spot. And anyway, so he said, "Treat me like I'm John P. Gurley and read this line to me, like I'm John P. Gurley." And I remember the line like it was yesterday. He said, "You're trying to convince John P. that you guys haven't beat American Fork in one sport in 9 years, and you want to start a wrestling team because you think you guys got a shot at beating, American Fork High School in wrestling, and to give you a chance." And so the line was, "I'm not saying that I can, but at least give us a chance to try." And he threw the script on the table, and he said, "If I gave you the choice between $1,000 a week and going back to wrestling, what would you take?" And I said, "Wow, that's an offer." But I said, "I'd get up and walk out." I said, because I really need my athletic career right now. I said, this is really important to me. He says, "You don't have to worry about that." And it was almost a test to see how devoted to wrestling we were.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, you're going to be able to work out on set, and we'll make sure which I was bullshit. It didn't matter. But I ended up working for 10 weeks and changed my life forever. I mean, from that moment forward, after that, in that year, 1978, I did takedown from January to March. I wrestled with second in the region and second in state, and never wrestled in a practice. Not one practice at my high school, that was bad, because getting through practice at Pleasant Grove High School was what made you badass, and we all knew it.
Right.
And then I dropped out of school, got married, and had a child by the 21st of December of 1978. So
Wow.
1978 was a big year for me. But what it did was concrete what the voice in my head that drove my heels for the rest of my life was, which was to pursue an entertainment career, regardless of where that drove me to. And
Right.
that's what Takedown just completely and utterly changed my life. And the part wasn't an extra part. The part was, a major character in the development of the story, because this Bobich, who I played in the movie, was the guy who inspired the team to come together so that we could beat Rockville. And it wasn't American Fork. He used the example of the adjoining school to us for the example, but the name of the school was Rockville High. And it was actually from Pennsylvania. The name of the school we wrestled for was Mingo Junction,
Hmm.
Pennsylvania. And the school that we fought against was Rockville High School. And anyway, so from that moment forward, my life path was prophetically concreted at that moment.
Yep. And if anybody wants to watch it, the movie is actually available on YouTube. So
Yeah.
I'm yeah. So I was searching it as we were conversing. I actually never heard of it until I was doing research for this episode. So now I have a movie to watch. Every time I always learn stuff when I'm doing this stuff. So
You know
now I
what
got stuff to go watch.
I think you're going to be surprised at, Rick, is it's, I don't know if you're a fan of the movie Vision Quest, which is kind of the
Yes, absolutely.
Vision Quest, the amateur wrestling movie everybody defaults to. But truly, Takedown was the first good amateur wrestling movie. And when you go watch it, you'll see what I'm talking about.
Right.
It's really, really, really well done. And like I said, I had an absolute blast doing it. It was cutting edge at the time. It was right after Rocky. It was a couple years after Rocky. You can actually hear the Rocky influence in the movie, from the music to the cinematography. It's a great movie. We just celebrated 45 years last year, and I went to actually it was this year. I went to a reunion for it, and I'm going to try and upload the BYU actually has the movie right now, and I'm going to try and figure out how to upload the new 4K version of
Hmm.
Takedown onto YouTube. So I don't know how to do that, but I think I can finally figure it out. It's probably time for me to get that on there, because it's really a good movie. And I think, if you like it, after watching it again, it still holds up today. It's got some great, it's just a great story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well,
I think
you compared it to Rocky, which is probably my favorite movie of all time,
yeah,
and of course
yeah,
Vision
exactly
Quest.
right.
Yeah, Vision Quest was I also wrestled in high school as well, and that kind of Vision Quest was one of those movies that kind of influenced me to go on and do that in school as well.
The only reason Takedown wasn't bigger was
Hmm.
because of the star of the movie. Believe it or
Hmm.
not, I just found this out at the reunion 45 years later. The guy that was in the movie the star of the movie was a guy named Edward Herman. And it had Lorenzo Lamas.
Yep.
It was his first major starring role, because he wasn't a star in Grease. He'd been in Grease. Grease, I think, was his first movie, but Takedown was his first starring role. But this Edward Herman, who as soon as you see the movie, you'll know who he is, because he God rest his soul, he's dead now, but he did narration he was a huge narrator voice in the early 2000s for everything from Civil War, Revolutionary War. He was the voice of like one of the major car companies. He had that great. He was just a great voiceover talent and a great on-air talent. He was in a lot of movies, in The Lost Boys. He was in a movie called Harry's War and Takedown and tons of other stuff. So when you see Edward Herrmann, but the problem is he was in a Disney movie, and Disney was releasing a movie with him in it at the exact same time as Takedown. I don't remember the name of the movie, but they didn't want Takedown to overshadow their movie, and so they buried Takedown. And I always, in Utah, Takedown did gangbusters. I mean, everybody in Utah went to see it because the whole movie's shot in Pleasant Grove and American Fork and Lehigh, Springville, Spanish Fork, all of Utah County, a little bit of Salt Lake County. And anyone who was anyone in the wrestling scene in Utah in 1978 was in this movie. All the coaching staffs, all the referees. It was a huge, huge thing in my hometown during this era. The funny part about it is do I have a little bit of PTSD from it? Yes, because first of all, my coach didn't even put me in the high school yearbook that year for the wrestling team. And I took second in state and second in region that year and still scored more points than I think I still hold the record as scoring the most individual points in a single season because I pinned everybody that year. Didn't put me in the yearbook. And what high school, I mean, American Fork High School, put a whole section about, which was the adjacent town to me, put a whole section about Takedown in the yearbook because how many schools have a movie go through their school,
right.
Pleasant Grove, Utah, for God's sakes. But instead of them embracing me, I got my back kind of turned on, they kind of turned their back on me because
sounds kind of petty.
I don't really hold any grudges, but there were teachers that were pissed because back then teachers didn't make any money. I made more money in the 10 weeks that I was in Takedown than most teachers did in a whole year that year. And they started calling me movie star and they failed me in all my classes when I was gone. And, I felt drama. In high school during the Takedown era. Really? Okay. I'm in a motion picture and I felt drama?
Good Lord, Kevin. Look at that thing. Yo, Chris, come here. Look at this.
That's huge, dude. Man. That might be the biggest one I've ever seen.
Right?
Look at this. Look. That's huge, man.
It's like a baby's arm, man.
Yeah, I know.
That's nice, man.
What can I say, guys?
Joe, come check this out, man. Check that out.
You gotta see this.
What is all the... Oh my gosh.
That's right.
It's the King's hot dog.
Yes, sir. It's a very good hot dog.
Oh yeah, the rumors are true. The King Dog, 14 inches of pure beef.
Secondhand Heroes and Home for Wayward Villains is a comic book shop and gaming store that also features Magic the Gathering and D&D. Located at 18184 Leesville Road in Evanston, Virginia, Secondhand Heroes is your one-stop shop for you to get your nerd on. Open 7 days a week at 11 a.m. They don't close until the dice stop rolling. They buy, sell, trade, barter, and haggle, specializing in collectible toys, both vintage and modern, comics, Magic the Gathering, video games, console, and arcade cabinets to play, all set to free play. Host your game night with us. Monday night D&D video game competitions, and so much more. Something for the collector and gamer in us all. Call 434-317-0121 or shoot us an email with any questions to secondhandheroesva@gmail.com. Note, secondhandheroesva@gmail.com. That's 2ND, handheroesva@gmail.com. Come game with us.
And then add to it, like I told you, I'm a at heart, I love the Sex Pistols.
Yeah.
So I'm a punk kid in a lot of ways. I loved heavy metal. I loved rock and roll. I loved the rebellion of Kiss and Alice Cooper and David Bowie. So, when people started doing that to me, I didn't hesitate a second to give them the finger, So I was that kid that, well, I'll show you.
Right.
And ironically, so here's a kind of a nice ironic twist to all this, is when I won the national championship for North Idaho College, I was a national champion on a national championship team. My mother cut the newspaper article out of that moment of me getting my hand raised and sent it to that football coach, Bill Kelly. And he had this is how he handled that. He wrote back and said, well, maybe you shouldn't hate me. Maybe you should thank me for being the voice in his head that drove his heels, because he hated me so bad. And my mom actually responded to that letter saying, well, if that's the kind of motivation that you seek, it's no wonder that you're not coaching football any longer. And, it was funny because I made sure that, I'm positive I was the first three-time All-American to come from my high school. I still hold an NCAA record for the most falls in the national tournament, probably a record that'll never be broken.
Right.
And so takedown just was absolutely infiltrated my life. And like I said, just even to this day, became the voice that drove me to go back to school, to, want an education and all of that. So takedown gets some major props from me.
Right. So what influenced you into getting into the world of professional wrestling? I see that you were trained by the legendary Red Bastien, and you did some ring crew work for WWF as well early on, prior to starting your wrestling career.
So when I was amateur wrestling, I ended up at Iowa State. Right before the NCAA tournament, my senior year at Iowa State, the ABC Sports, the only time you ever saw amateur wrestling on television on ABC Sports, you'll remember this, was the NCAA tournament. They would show highlights of the NCAA tournament every March, and we all, couldn't wait to go watch it. I mean, even though it was, a follow-up segment to ice skating shit, it never got the credit it deserved. And
I think still to this day, it doesn't necessarily get the credit because you probably see it on TV once a year. I remember just watching a NCAA tournament on MSG Network back then, which they don't even air wrestling anymore. Now you got to have some super cable package to get, college wrestling or whatever. The only time, and they don't even show when the Olympics are on, you got to be lucky if they're going to air that,
even at all, right?
Yeah.
So we couldn't, we could never wait for that ABC Wide World of Sports segment when the NCAA tournament was on. And usually my coach from high school was in it because he was an NCAA ref. He was a world-renowned referee. And so we all watched it. We would watch it as a wrestling team. We'd watch that. So anyway, I'm at Iowa State, and my coach comes to me one day. He says, "Hey, there's a photographer here from ABC, and they want to ask the guys questions, to use in the NCAA, the buildup for the tournament, right? So they want to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." So I went and interviewed with this guy. His name was Rich Zielinski. And he interviewed me. And the last thing he said to me says, "Hey, if you're ever in LA, look me up." And that's all he said. He didn't go beyond that, right? Just said, "If you're ever in LA, look me up." Okay. So I didn't think anything of it. I went to the NCAA tournament, had a great tournament. I was fifth, like I said, broken NCAA record. My coach gave me a plaque that I still have to this day. It says to a record that may never be broken, and up till now it hasn't been. And so, I was really proud of the fact that I did end up being an NCAA Division I All-American. And so because of Takedown, the reason I was at Iowa State was because I went there to get an education in television and film, because Iowa State had a commercial television station. The only land-grant school in the United States that had a commercial television station, and I worked for them for 3 years while I was going to school. And I knew when I graduated from college, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I knew I was going to move to Los Angeles to seek fame and fortune. And I came back to Utah. The director of photography from Takedown was a guy named Reed Smoot, and his home is just off of Center Street in Provo, Utah. And I called him on the phone. That was back in the day when you had phone books, and his name was in the phone book. And I called him on the phone, and I went in to see Reed and to ask his advice and see if he would. I knew he knew people in LA, right? Because he'd still, he continued, he's directed, probably 50, 75 motion pictures as a director of photography. So I went to him, and I'll never forget the last thing he said to me. We were sitting on his porch drinking a glass of lemonade. And he said, Daryl, you got to go to Los Angeles. He goes, because you never know what you might find in Los Angeles. He goes, Los Angeles is a crazy town. And I said, okay. So I packed up. I had a 1969 Chevrolet four-door Malibu. And back in 69, Chevrolet did this really crazy shit where they painted a bunch of cars from that era with this really, really ugly satin finish blue paint that by 5 to 10 years later, it just was it looked, talk about patina. You couldn't wax them, you couldn't buff them, they just looked like shit. But it had a 350 with Fuely 202 heads on it, so I didn't, and a turbo 400 on it, so I didn't really give a shit because it ran like a son of a bitch, So I loaded up my Impala and moved to Beverly. Moved to LA and lived with, actually I moved to Long Beach. I had a cousin who lived in Long Beach and started looking for a job in LA. And I started off not, couldn't find anything in the movie industry. So I was trying out for, I was going through the paper and, trying out for every kind of job possible. And I hadn't found a job. And this one morning, my cousin was in the next room. He, I was going to sleep in this morning. And of course, that morning I'm going to sleep in. He's up at 5 o'clock in the morning listening to this brand new radio station called KNAC in Los Angeles, which is the big rock and roll station in LA. Just come on the air, heavy metal station in Los Angeles. And he's in there listening to this. I'm in my room, pulling the pillow over my head, tossing and turning, going, "You son of a bitch. Why do you have," I wasn't really cussing at him except privately. And he comes running in the room and he goes, "Cousin Daryl," he goes, "You want to go to Los Angeles? You want to go to downtown LA and see a movie premiere?" And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "I just won tickets on KNAC to go see a movie premiere. Pee-wee's Big Adventure is going to have its world premiere in downtown LA. You want to go?" And I went, "Oh my God, yes." So we got up. Went to Still Beach, went body surfing all day, then went back to the house, got cleaned up. Off we go to this. I know you're going, Max, is this going, right? We go to this premiere, and man, it's just loaded with stars. David Lee Roth, Alice Cooper. I mean, I got to see my idol, Alice Cooper, and David Lee Roth, and Pee Wee Herman, and James Brolin was there, and all the actors that were in Pee Wee's Big Adventure, and Paul Rubens was there, and it was just, it was exactly what you'd hope a motion picture premiere, right? And we got front row seats, man. We were literally standing by the door where everybody's going in. And right in front of me, there was this dude who was genuinely a foot shorter than me. And he had his back to me. And I said to my cousin, I said, well, God, there's a job I could do. Man, if this guy can get a job as a security guard, I sure could. And the guy turned around and he was literally looking at me, right in the chest. He goes, dude, you would have a job in 2 seconds. And he gave me their card. So I went home that day, I called them, and they immediately put me to work. And the first job I had was a punk rock concert in downtown Los Angeles at the old Olympic Auditorium. And it was awesome. It's a whole story in and of itself.
Who was it? What was the band? What was the band?
Oh, it was a multitude of bands.
Yep.
It was, I remember the big band on the card was Heavy Dirt. It was crazy, man. It's funny. Remember the scene in Airplane where they're all standing in line to beat the shit out of the lady that won't stop screaming, right?
Yeah.
So I'm standing at the front door taking away like the spikes and knives and brass knuckles, and everybody that came through the door, we had a trash can there that was literally full to the top of spikes and brass knuckles. Every kid that came through, they had to throw all their shit in the trash can. So anyway, I did that. It was a great show. There's a lot of details to that. I won't bore you with all of them, but I did that. Then the next night I did a shot where I was a bouncer at a bar right next to the Coliseum where every LA Raider came in to party. John Matusak, Lyle Alzado, Jim Plunkett, the Wilson that played for BYU. They were all there and everybody was partying there. And I'm like, wow. And it's funny because they did not F with me at all, brother. I mean, they did not mess with me because I was a big boy at the time. I was 6'5", 330, 340. So I was pretty intimidating. And I because of my amateur background, most guys could just tell right away that I was probably a guy you shouldn't, fuck with, kind of thing. And so the next day, the third job I had was a boxing match at the Palladium on Sunset Strip. And now the Palladium is a little ballroom that's uber famous in Los Angeles. I'm still there today.
Yeah.
They gave me a gig there, and it was a boxing match between Tate, Tillman, and Gonzalez. And it was, I think it was Tillman's debut as a pro after the Olympics. His first debut match as a professional boxer after the Olympics. So I went there, and the first position they put me in was at the side of the ring because I knew television and they knew I knew television. So they wanted me to kind of watch out for the TV guys. So I go down to the ring and I'm standing at the edge of the ring, and this handheld camera guy is walking back towards me, and I can see nobody's got their hand on his, but usually when somebody's walking backwards, he doesn't have an assistant that knows what to do. I did know what to do because I had worked in television for 3 years. Mm-hmm. So I reached out and stuck my hand on his back and started guiding him backwards. And he didn't even turn around and look at me. He just followed me back. And when he stopped, he turned and looked at me and he goes, "Hey, oh my God. Remember the guy from the ABC story? It was him." He goes, "Oh my God, you need a job, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I can't talk. Here's my card. Call me." And I go, "Oh my God." So he gives me his card. So I'm standing there, and one of the supervisors comes and gets me, and he goes, "Hey, I need you to go stand back here and cover this doorway back into this area where it was, I swear to God, brother, it was exactly in the Palladium. It was exactly the place where every good fella in the city was sitting, smoking cigars with their Goombas and drinking and hiding in the dark, right? Underneath this, it was underneath the terrace, and there was no lights under this thing, and you couldn't see anything. So they put me right there, and that supervisor come back around. He goes, I got somebody I want to introduce you to. Stay here. I'll be right back. And I said, okay. He comes back, and this guy walks up to me. He goes, Daryl Peterson. And I'm like, yeah. He goes, you don't know me, but my name is Dave Knudsen. And he said, I am from Lehi, Utah. I have followed your entire career. I know everything about you. And he says, the reason I'm here to talk to you right now is underneath this terrace right here, there's a guy who is in the upper echelon of the World Wrestling Federation. He goes, you want to meet him? You ever thought about being a pro wrestler? And I'm like, yeah. So he goes, come on with me. And he takes me back and he introduces me to Red Bastien.
Wow.
Yeah. And then after I was done with that, this is the three things that happened to me at the Tate, Tillman, and Gonzalez. They marched me to the back of the stage where all of the VIPs were leaving. They put me at that door to make sure nobody came in that wasn't supposed to come in through that door, because a lot of people try to get in through that door, knowing well that, they can a lot of times talk to security guard, but they knew that nobody would F with me. So they put me back there. And so I'm standing there and I'm kind of looking out the door. So the door's right here. The pathway's coming towards me, and I'm kind of looking out the door like that. And all of a sudden, somebody runs straight into my chest. And I look down, and all I can see is blonde hair. And it's a woman. And she looks up at me, and she goes, so sorry. And it was Farrah Fawcett.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Farrah Fawcett and Ryan O'Neal. And Ryan goes, well, God, Farrah, at least you run into the right guy. Jesus Christ, And they were cordial and laughed about it. And thank you for not, beating me up. Oh, why are you kidding? You're Farrah Fawcett, man. So they left. And so, as you can imagine, man, I'm on, after this day, I knew I'd found the right job. And from that moment forward, because of the connection, because of Rich Zielinski, I ended up doing all kinds of amazing gigs in LA because of that. And because of Red, I ended up doing all kinds of amazing gigs in LA because of the WWF. And whenever somebody needed wrestling, they would call Red. And whenever somebody, I ended up working for the Raiders as a handheld cameraman on the field at the Coliseum for an entire season. One of the greatest times of my life, working for the Raiders. So that's how I ended up, because of Takedown, because of after I graduated from college, and really because of Takedown, I ended up in LA, and that's how I met Red Bastien, and he started to train me. And very early on, Red started to hint that he was going to try and get me booked in Japan. And eventually that happened, and he got me booked in Japan. I ended up building the ring for the WWF for 6 months, a year. And then I built the cage for WrestleMania 2. And then in August of '86, I left, and I met Chris Benoit in a hotel at LAX, and we got on a plane together and went and lived as dojo roommates for the next 9 months solid, and then saw each other on and off for the next year and a half in and out of Japan. And that's exactly how I got into pro wrestling.
That part I didn't know about anything about Benoit. Is there any kind of stories that you might have, like positive stories that you might have, good memories with Chris? What's that?
Oh yeah, Chris. I've said this over and over again, and I have to, you have to draw, you got to kind of negotiate this territory because what he did is so horrible.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly can't. I can't even believe it to this day. Having lived with Chris and knowing Chris the way I knew Chris, but I'll translate who Chris Benoit was to me. Chris got me my job in Europe. He ended up being just one of my absolute best friends. When I was in the WCW, I basically gave him a key to my apartment because he was coming in and out of the WCW in Europe all the time, or I mean in Atlanta all the time, and I had now got an apartment there because I was booked solid there, and so I just gave him a key, and he would come to town and he would stay with me. But it's funny, he wouldn't. So when we were in Japan, we used to go to these townships in Tokyo called Setagayaku or not Setagayaku, Shibuya and Roppongi. And Shibuya and Roppongi in Tokyo are the big, they call them the young person's parts of town. That's where everybody goes. They had these massive CD and cassette stores at a place called Saturn Hansa. And Chris and I, whenever we had a Sunday off, we would get on the train and we would go down to Saturn Hansa and we would buy tapes and CDs. And then we would go back to the dojo and we would make mixtapes. And one of my favorite things to do, I started, my audio engineering career early, is I would take my favorite lines off of my favorite movies, like for example, RoboCop. I would use one of my favorite lines from the movie RoboCop is, "I'd buy that for $1." And so I would use that line to segue between two of our favorite songs. And then, there's another line where he says, "Just give me my fucking phone call." He used that one. And we had a whole bunch of lines like from Once Upon a Time in America. And, so I would take all these lines and use them as segues, and I'd make these tapes called Maxx Metal tapes. I called them mixtapes. And Chris saved those tapes I'll bet he still had them when, he ended his life. I know he did, because this is how Chris would tell me he was coming to town. I would get a phone call, and all that would be on the phone call was it would start with, "I'd buy that for $1," and then the song it led into. And so whenever I heard one of our mixtapes that only I would know what it was, right?
Yeah.
I would hear that mixtape. I knew Chris was going to be in town within the next 24 hours. And so I always, it's one of those moments that I couldn't wait to hear that phone call because I knew Chris was going to be in town and stay at my apartment. So that's just one of the stories of Chris Benoit. Chris was an amazing individual. He met obviously a very, very, very tragic ending, and I'm so sad that his legacy is tarnished, because anybody that you ever talked to that knew Chris, worked with Chris, was around Chris, to this day, they all say the same thing. He was probably one of the most gifted guys in the professional wrestling business.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
And,
amazing to watch, like all the time. Yeah.
He was absolutely amazing, but he couldn't overcome the fact that CTE had taken 2/3 of his brain mass.
Right.
And it always broke my heart for his family because of that. But I loved Chris, and I'm so sad that his life and career ended so tragically.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's real sad because it's like he still gets bashed a lot online, but I'm just like, I'm still a huge fan. I'll still go back home and watch it.
I mean,
yeah.
pretty tough to kill your wife and kid and, and not be bashed.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But,
so you ended up saying that you ended up going to Japan, and did you start out there? Like actually start wrestling in Japan? Did you make
I broke in.
Yeah.
I broke in Japan. I trained with Red, and then I spent 9 months like leaning on the apron. That's what I did. So Chris and I lived with the Japanese in the dojo. We didn't travel with the gaijins or the Americans. Actually, gaijin means foreigner in Japanese. And so the gaijins stayed at the Kyo Plaza Hotel in downtown Tokyo. But the New Japan guys all lived in the dojo in Setagayaku. And they treated us like we were New Japan dojo guys. And so we lived in the dojo, and we would go to the arenas with the Japanese. And anybody who's ever been to Japan knows the Japanese, they work out for 2 hours as a group, like a high school wrestling team. They beat the shit out of everybody for 2 hours before the match. When the ring gets built, we had a guy named Kroneko, Black Cat, and Black Cat was our coach, and he would lead us in calisthenics, and we called it playing cards. He would take a deck of cards, and he'd roll a card off, and if it was a number 2, that always got a 0 added to it, and you did 20 push-ups. And then the next card came out, if it was a 4, he'd add a 0 to it, and you did 40 sit-ups. And so we would do a whole deck of cards every single day we were on tour. And they did that because that's what the Japanese take to build the respect for the Japanese guys. And they wanted Chris and I to be those guys. They wanted us to be those guys that went through the Japanese mentality to be wrestlers. And we both did it. We both went through that mentality and succeeded and stayed there the whole time. So, it was, so then once you got done working out, you'd go back and you put your sweats on and you'd come out and you'd walk wrestlers to the ring and you'd take their jackets back and then you'd come back out and you'd kneel down next to the ring, ringside. I'm talking like they're in the ring right there. And if I've got pictures of me and Chris like this, leaning on ringside, watching the matches. And I watched everybody from Bam Bam to Vader to Fujinami, Kimura, Bruiser Brody, all of the wrestlers that were from America. I watched.
That's awesome. You were there for probably about a year, I think. Well, at least your in-ring career. And you've had some great opponents as well. The earliest match I could find is you taking in a match against Masahiro Chono, which, I mean, that's kind of a big match for something like that.
It's funny because, Red was old school, and so he would teach you how important it was to, he goes, now listen, big boy. He goes, when these old timers come to Japan, he goes, you don't ask them to tell you what you did right in the ring. You ask them to tell you what you did wrong and how you can be better. You never ask them what you did right. You always ask them what you can do to be better. And so I would ask, man, like Dick Murdoch, and one of my favorite people in the world is a guy named Bill Eadie, who wrestled for Demolition. And Bill, the last time I saw him at a convention, I went up to him and thanked him because he taught me a lot of great lessons about the wrestling business. And, so I would go to them and say, hey, will you watch my match and tell me what I can do to be better and so on and so forth. And So I did that to Dick Murdoch one night, and I went back after. I got on the ropes. I jumped up on the second rope to do a splash, and the Japanese use these rubber coated cables instead of real rope, and so everybody's greased down with baby oil, right? So I jump up on the second rope, and I go to jump off the second rope, and I slip. And it was, honestly, you couldn't have done it funnier if you would have tried. I literally fell right out of the corner. I didn't go like 1 inch away from the corner. I just fell straight down in the corner. And I had to crawl to the guy that was laying in the middle of the ring. And on that particular match, I'd asked Dick Murdoch to come and watch my match. So I walked backstage and said to him, I said, well, I guess I can kind of presume where we're going with this. He goes, no, I don't think you can. He says, I got some good advice for you, kid. Take 2 weeks off out of the business and then quit. I said, thanks, Dick. We've all been a kid. He goes, he actually lightened up on me and said, we've all made mistakes. And what better place to make them than in Japan, where nobody's ever going to know about them. And, you make those mistakes and you get laughed at here. That way you can go to the States and not have to worry about it. So that's what I did, man. And my debut big match was with Barbarian in the Sumo Palace in front of 22,000. And I still, every time I look at it to this day, it's, oh, my God. It's so embarrassing, You watch that shit and you go, oh my God. And I thought I knew shit. I didn't get, I was so green and so backwards. And, it's those moments that keep you humble when you look back at how foolish you looked in the ring. But, the Japanese people were really kind to me and I was really fortunate. So, yeah, I loved living in Japan.
That's awesome. That sounds exciting. From there, you ended up in Memphis, for the Jarretts and Lawler, and you transitioned into the Maxx Payne character. How was that character developed? And
it's funny because I've never had a single promoter, not one, that wanted to support the Maxx Payne character. And the Japanese were no different. Mm-hmm. When I started suggesting I was going to be Maxx Payne, the Japanese that's part of the reason I didn't go back very much, is because the Japanese, they did not want me to tell them what I wanted to do. They were going to tell me what I was going to do. And I'm just not that guy. I had a very succinct idea of what I wanted to be in the wrestling business. And I wanted to be the Alice Cooper of the wrestling business. I did. I wanted to be the dark, black number one. I wanted to grow my hair really fucking long. I wanted to be dark and menacing, and I wanted to be that guy that there was nobody else like it. There was Hawk and Animal that were Road Warriors, but that wasn't heavy metal. Right. It was in its own way, but it was Road Warriors. Then there was Taker, and Taker was dark, but he was the dead man. He's
more gothic, kind of. Yeah.
He had a very, very distinct niche that was amazing. But I was before Taker. Taker followed me actually in Memphis as the Master of Pain. Believe it or not, that was his first name in Memphis was the Master of Pain. And so I always wanted to do the Maxx Payne character. Always. I hadn't incorporated the guitar yet because I hadn't really devoted myself to the next level of my expertise on the guitar yet. And so I started the Maxx Payne character in Memphis. But then when I went to Germany after Memphis, so let me just say this about Memphis. I've said this over and over again. Memphis, wow, the hardest thing I've ever done. I mean, it was brutal. $175 a week, $200 a week, $185 a week, traveling 3,000 to 4,000 miles, beating the shit out of your cars and trying to figure out, 4 people in a hotel room to try and save money. Something else most of the boys won't talk about are the women who took care of us while we were on the road. The women who took care of us were incredible. But Memphis was an amazing, amazing learning place for me. It was just one of those times in my life where I learned the business because I got to travel up and down the road with great guys like Gorgeous Gary Young and Brickhouse Brown and Billy Travis. And I met Bill Dundee and Jeff Jarrett. And of course, the King dropped his strap to me. And, so I was on cloud 9 in Memphis. I really was. I had a great time, and I have nothing again. It was hard as hell. But I have nothing but fond memories of Memphis, and it was an amazing, amazing place.
That's awesome. So you also ended up you had the feud with Lawler where you did win the belt. Yep. You ended up having a barbed wire match with him as well. So what was that like? Was that like your first experience doing something like that?
You know what's great about Lawler, man? And that's when I started really learning the business is, you get in the ring with I would get in the ring with Lawler. I'd go over and try to talk to him before the match, and he'd go, we'll just do it in the ring. And, as a young guy, you're scared shitless of that, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'd probably only had 20 matches in Japan. And so, here I am in Memphis now getting ready to go out on the road every single night. And as soon as I get there, because I'm a big, nasty heel, Lawler's immediately going to, he's going to work with me. But, there's an expression in the business called a night off. Mm-hmm. And working with Lawler is a night off. You get in the ring with Jerry, and all I had to do was listen. The main thing you had to do is when that strap came down on his tight, you knew it's time to sell,
Right.
And if you did that, everything was hunky-dory. And so I did that. I listened to Lawler and I did what he asked me to do. And I had a wonderful, wonderful time in Memphis. I really did.
Right. In 1993, you got picked up by WCW, and how did that ended up? How did you end up in WCW? Basically, I know you went to Germany in between.
Yeah, I was in Germany for 2 years, which ironically was also called the CWA.
Right.
So, Lawler's territory was called the CWA, and so was Germany. So I worked in 2 CWAs, both of them different territories, completely, obviously. I worked in Europe for 2 seasons, and again. Oh my God. Changed my life. Well, that's where I really developed the guitar playing Maxx Payne character. So in Germany, because of Dave Finlay and really Dave Finlay and Rip Rogers were the guys who really, really said, look, you stupid son of a bitch, you can play the guitar. Go out there and play the guitar as part of your gimmick. And I did. And because of that, the town we were in at the time was Hanover, Germany, when I introduced the Maxx Payne guitar carrying Maxx Payne. And almost immediately, Hanover was notorious for being a really tough town. We didn't put too many asses in seats. And after I started playing the guitar, life got much easier in Hanover, Germany, and I would defy any of those boys that were there with me during that time to tell you anything different. Because I was playing, the houses started to pick up, and whenever you're in a situation where the houses pick up, our money didn't change from the office, but what changes is the pictures you sign, the T-shirts you sell, the beers the fans buy you, parties you end up going to because there's more people there. And
Right.
because of the Maxx Payne guitar playing character, the territory blew up that year. We did really, really good that year. And I like to believe that the Maxx Payne character had a lot to do with that. And then because of Rip Rogers and Rip's connection with Bill Watts, with Cowboy Bill Watts, Rip, one day we got a couple $100 worth of Deutschmark coins and went to a payphone, started putting coins in a payphone, and he called Cowboy Bill Watts for me, and I talked to him from Germany, and Rip was standing in the phone booth with me, and it was tight. I will tell you, it was tight. Not sure I wanted to be quite that close to Rip. No, I love Rip is an amazing, amazing individual. And he called Bill, and Bill loved me because I was a shooter. I had the amateur background, and Watts was a mark for that shit. And
Right.
So when I went home after the last show in Bremen, Germany in 1992, in January, right after Christmas, Bill flew me to Atlanta, signed a contract with me, and I debuted, I think it was January 30th.
It's definitely January 93. Yeah.
I played at the first time I played the guitar in front of people was at Super Brawl in 93. And then the rest is history. I spent 93 and 94 in Atlanta.
Secondhand Heroes and Home for Wayward Villains is a comic book shop and gaming store that also features Magic the Gathering and D&D. Located at 18184 Leesville Road in Evington, Virginia, Secondhand Heroes is your one-stop shop for you to get your nerd on. Open 7 days a week at 11 a.m. They don't close until the dice stop rolling. They buy, sell, trade, barter, and haggle, specializing in collectible toys, both vintage and modern, comics, Magic the Gathering, video games, console, and arcade cabinets to play, all set to free play. Host your game night with us, Monday night D&D video game competitions, and so much more. Something for the collector and gamer in us all. Call 434-317-0121 or shoot us an email with any questions to secondhandheroesva@gmail.com. Note, secondhandheroesva@gmail.com. That's 2ND, handheroesva@gmail.com. Come game with us.
It's AIWF. Wanna see the best wrestling? Where to connect? The squared circle, the place you have to earn your respect. So get right with the program or you'll get left. AIWF across the US and all over the globe. We are live and direct. So tune and see who wins and lose stuff for the Lord. This match just got you over one.
You got to work with a lot of great people in the WCW. You got to work numerous matches against legendary Brad Armstrong, dearly missed individual. And Brad was one of those guys. He never had a bad match. And he has the best drop kick in professional wrestling. I was just having this discussion the other day because I was watching some older stuff, and it's one of those things. It's like, man, that drop kick is just so beautiful. So you got to work with Johnny Gunn. It's who's Tom Brandy. Do you remember working with Johnny at all? You remember him? Yeah. And
with Tom Brandy?
Yeah.
Oh, hell yeah. Tom was a good friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love Tom Brandy. Tom Boom Boom Brandy. And
yeah.
Brad Armstrong was an absolutely hugely influential person in my career because I was building a band at the time. And Brad had one hell of a voice. Brad could sing his ass off. And I was trying to put together this band. I'd already written about 6 or 7 songs. And I was already in the process of buying and building a recording studio to continue on with the Maxx Payne character. It seemed only logical that I put together a band. And so I put together a band of all wrestlers. Nick Patrick was the rhythm guitar player. Brad Armstrong was going to be the singer. I had a friend named Mike Clare who was out of Nashville and who was a great musician and also a professional wrestler. And I'd met him in the Nashville Armory. And then I had a friend that I taught how to wrestle when I had my own little territory in Utah between Memphis and Germany. I had my own little territory at home called the WWA. And I taught this friend of mine named Nathan Carroll how to be a wrestler. And he went under the moniker of Kid Ego. He was great. And he's a world-class drummer. To tell you how great of a drummer is, he's in a Led Zeppelin tribute band. So that tells you what a great drummer he is.
Right. You got to be. Yeah.
So I put this band together. Brad signed the contract. I rented a studio in downtown Atlanta at a place called Rehearse Too Much. And I'd flown all my guys. I'd spent all the money. I was carrying all these guys down there. I'd cashed in all my tickets on my contract. And I had about $35,000 I was working with to try and get this album done, buy a studio and get these guys in Atlanta, and signed a contract with Brad, found an agent who loved us and was kind of now financially backing it. Her name was Sandra Glass. And we signed the contract and went to the studio, and Brad never showed up. Never showed up again. And I was crushed. I was literally crushed. And one day I got a call from Tex Schlesinger. Tex in Shanghai and I lived in the same building in Marietta, right next to Sting's gym. And that's why all the boys lived there, because they could just walk out of the parking lot and walk up to Sting's gym. Nash and Hall and all those guys ended up living in this apartment complex because the gym was literally 100 yards away. And so I get a call one night from Tex, and he goes, "There's somebody here at the Outback." We had an Outback in Marietta we loved to go to. He says, "There's somebody here at the Outback. You need to come meet Max." And I said, "Okay, who is it?" And he goes, "Just get down here." And I said, "Okay." So I went down there, and he introduced me to Brian Armstrong. And Brian looks me in the eye and he says, "Look, I know you were, have my brother online to do this. I know all the story behind it." And Brad's, he didn't bag on Brad, but he made it pretty clear he knew Brad wasn't going to do it. Him and Brad had a conversation that Brad wasn't committed to being in this band with me. I'd heard Brad sing in the shower, and at one of our gigs in Alabama, the Armory in Alabama, and I went, "Oh my God, there's my guy." That's how I ended up recruiting Brad to be in the band. And he said he wanted to. He really acted like he wanted to. But Brian proceeds to give me this huge sales pitch that he can do it. And so I said, "Okay, come back to my apartment and let's see what you got." And we went back to my apartment. I played, at the time, I had 3 or 4 songs that were really popular on the radio. Plush by Stone Temple Pilots. I was playing this song by Four Non Blondes. And then and I go outside and I say, "Come on," and then real high. "Hey, what's going on?" And I said, "Hey, yeah." You know that song?
Yeah. Yep.
Brian could knock the shit out of that song. So I played that song, and I played that one, and then I had written a song called That Song, and I showed him the words, and I sang basically sang him the melody, and he sang it, and I said, "Dude, okay, if you want to do this, you have got to get Brad on the phone, and Brad's got to sign a contract release and saying that you're going to be the guy to do it." And he said, "Okay." And Brian made it all happen. And from that point forward, we rented a house in Marietta down the street from our apartments. And I started to build a studio in Jonesboro, Georgia. I built what was called an Alesis ADAT Dream Studio, which was the first home digital studio that anybody could afford to buy one, so to speak.
Right.
And so I built an ADAT Dream Studio. I bought the X2 mixer and 3 ADATs and some really high-end microphones and preamplifiers and front-end audio stuff. And I still, it's going to come out, actually, this album. I've never really released it, but it's finally going to come out this year in this movie that I've made. And so I'm excited for the world to finally hear how good Brian really was at this. I always believed Brian was every bit as good a vocalist as he was a wrestler. The thing was, for Brian, he knew wrestling so well that he couldn't envision making that kind of switch. And it just, in the end, it's sad. It all fell apart. Mm-hmm. But the story is pretty goddamn amazing. And when you finally get to hear the whole thing, the whole story, and you get to hear the music, because what I am proud about the music is there's not another band in the world prior to me that wrote songs that were wrestling voiced. And when you listen to my songs, there's, I wrote an homage to The Page by Bob Seger called That Song, and it's about life on the road as a wrestler. And got into the car for just another day, a different pill to take my pain away, still all alone, and I don't understand why. The harder I fall, seems like the more I cry, and I just want it all to go away and leave me alone and take me to that place that my mind calls home, and I just want to stop. No more phones, no more cars, empty beds, and sold-out bars, and I just want to hear that song again. And that was one of the first lyrics I wrote about what it felt like as life on the road as a wrestler. And so I wanted to give, I always believed that what was interesting about wrestler was the life on that side of the curtain. Mm-hmm. You know? And I was just way too far ahead of my time because WWF just came out with Unreal. And I did that exact same thing exactly 30 years ago on October 3rd of this year. So hopefully this movie is going to come out this year and people are finally going to get to see what I did 30 years ago. And I'm still proud of it to this day. It's quite a bit different because it's not sanctioned by the WWF. They didn't, Triple H didn't get to run this movie. I did. And it actually shows the hatred of the guys that I was trying my ass off to develop my place, to keep my place in the WWF. But I knew I was fighting an uphill battle. And because it's pretty obvious in this movie that these guys don't like me. I mean, they make it clear in front of my camera how much they dislike me. And I'll just let the video speak for itself, and people can make their own conclusions by it. But I wrote the soundtrack for this movie before it happened, before I shot. Right. So all of it's going to come together in the next 6 months or so.
Wow, I can't wait to see it. That sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. The 3 R's of a great documentary: real, raw, and rare. Yeah. I look forward to it. So, I guess we could talk a little bit about your WWF career, right? So, I would love to. So, how did you feel when you got there? Because it's kind of, to me, it was a completely different product, WCW and WWF at that time period. WCW, as much as they tried, it was still very Southern. Yeah. It was, I got to tell you, I've said this before, and I have to be careful because there's a lot of, I found out there, I was very insecure about the Man Mountain Rock character, but there is a lot of Man Mountain Rock fans out there still. And, so I don't want to disparage them, but
When I went to the WWF, I'm going to quote Mick Foley on this. Mick Foley said in an interview last year that when I went to the WWF, they defrocked me. And that really surmises what happened. Jim Johnston didn't like me because I was a musician. And Jim Johnston was the guy who was in control of all the musical stuff in the WWF. And I hated his playing. I hated his tone. I should have said no over and over. The biggest mistake I made in the WWF, and I heard Steve Austin say this on numerous occasions. He said, no, I'm not going to do that because they wanted him to do something that he wasn't comfortable with doing.
Right.
And I should have just looked Vince in the eye and I said, no, Vince, if you're not going to do it the way I want to do it, then I'll just walk away right now. And that's the only thing I wished I would have done, because in the end, the sacrifices that I made to be Man Mountain Rock were not in the direction I wanted to be in. I was not tie-dye. I mean, I wore tie-dye, don't get me wrong. I love tie-dye, and I would wear tie-dye shirts, but I didn't want to wear tie-dye in the ring. I wanted to wear black and white heavy metal T-shirts and skulls and crossbones and, all that shit. And when I got to the WWF, man, Nash, Hall, Shawn, Triple H, they went after me, man. I happened to be another one of those guys that they were bound and determined to pick on. And, I guarantee you, they'd tell you, oh, it's just because I wasn't talented. And the great part about that is they can say that all they want to, but the videotape that I shot doesn't lie. And so when you hear the crowds reacting to the Man Mountain Rock character, you'll get to see how, had the WWF really, had anybody, the WCW didn't invest in the guitar playing Maxx, and the WWF didn't invest in the guitar playing Maxx. And I never understood how organizations that are completely designated and designed to make money didn't want to make money with me. I mean, all they'd had to done was try. What would they have had to lose? I mean, the worst that could have happened was I would have failed, but they wouldn't, they hated me so bad. And like I said, you'll see that evidence in the movie, how these guys felt about me to my face. Mm-hmm. And they just decided that they weren't gonna do that. I always believed that sooner or later somebody would go, oh my God, do you not see the dollars we're jumping over here that Maxx might be able to make its money with? I mean,
there was a lot of politicking and ass kissing by some, I guess. You know what I'm saying?
I tried that.
Yeah.
But they didn't like my style of ass kissing, and they didn't like me because I was a typical fat bastard. This summarizes exactly what happened to me. Is Bill Dundee said, looked me and Mick Foley right in the eyes on our way to we were traveling to St. Charles, Louisiana. And I was with Mike Graham, Greg Gagne, and Bill Dundee in a van. They gave us a ride. And I will never forget Bill Dundee looking Mick Foley and I in the eyes and saying, what blows me away is that two fat, ugly fuckers like you think you could ever get over as baby faces. And that was the part that, see, who cares? Who cares what you look like? That's one of the things Vince did prove, is that, it doesn't matter what you look like if the crowd buys you as a babyface.
Right.
That's what the Road Warriors proved. When they first came out, they were heels, but quickly people loved, big ass kicking, heels dressed like the Road Warriors. And so it wasn't long, they were baby faces. And guys like Bill Dundee and The Office, they just couldn't stand that guys that looked like us could get over at the same magnitude as baby blue, patent leather blue, tight wearing baby faces. And they could not stand that, And It showed. It showed.
Yeah. Yeah. So my last question is, what else do you have going on these days? Besides the movie coming out, what is Maxx Payne, Daryl Peterson up to today?
So I will show you. The next thing I'm going to do is I have a product I'm working on right now.
Yep.
And I've been working on this product for 30 years. It's something that I'm very passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
My guitar playing career has waned quite a bit because I've had some real physical problems with my hands.
Mm-hmm.
I've had multiple surgeries. I've got trigger finger. I mean, everything you wouldn't want as a guitar player, but because of the wrestling business, I have abused my body so bad. I've had ulnar relocation surgery in both my elbows. I've had carpal tunnel and ulnar relocation in both of my hands. I'd like to believe that someday I'll be able to play again and really get back to it, but I get further and further away from it every day, which is just as discouraging as hell. But years ago, I invented an oil that I invented for lubricating guitars with. And this is what it comes in a little bag like this. And it's not for sale yet. I'm almost there, but I'm kind of debuting it with you today, Rick.
All right.
I invented this stuff called GLX, and it's called GLX Pocket Oiler. It's a I call it a multi-spectrum lubricant for your guitar. And the one thing that I believe in first and foremost about guitars is guitars are first and foremost a machine. And my father taught me a lot of great principles about machinery, and I'm going to pass it on with that. And then on top of that, the GLX works great in a myriad of environments, not just on the guitar. And so I'm going to start just selling it on my YouTube channel. And then I have 2 or 3 novels that I'm working on right now. The movie's going to come out, and so is my album. So in the next 6 months or so, a lot of this stuff is going to finally start to trickle out.
All right. That sounds awesome. Sounds like you're very busy.
I try to be.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming by here today and speaking for this show. And I would love to have you back again sometime in the future, especially when your movie comes out. I'd love to have you back to talk about that movie even more. We can go through it.
Yeah, you're gonna definitely want me to come back when the movie comes out. It's gonna raise some eyebrows because it's first of all, at least 50% of the folks in it have passed. Yeah, most of the guys in that movie are gone, and
Wow.
So that's part of it right there.
Right.
And secondly, it brings something to the table that even with the unreal, you don't get what this movie brings to the table, because this wasn't manufactured by the WWF. It was manufactured by me, and I was going through some terrible strife at the time. Like I said, they were dead set on defrocking me and taking all my stuff away from me, and I knew posthumously that this was going to be. I knew prophetically that this was going to be my last tour in the WWF, and there's a massive story included in that includes the rock star Steve Miller.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you're gonna want to talk about, Rick, and ask about. So, hey, I look forward to coming back, and you'll keep the relationship going.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Hey, it was my pleasure, man. Thank you.